A black man was rejected in a job interview because of his skin. 5 minutes later, the CEO walked in. This might be the best story you'll hear today. Enjoy it. The morning light filtered through cracked blinds, casting sharp lines across Ruby, Washington's weathered hands as she polished her black pumps for the 4th time. The leather was worn but dignified like the woman who wore them. At 52, Ruby carried herself with the quiet grace of someone who had weathered storms but never lost her compass. Today was different, though. Today, the knot in her stomach felt heavier than usual as she prepared for the interview that could change everything. Her small Chicago apartment held the weight of years. Photographs of her daughter Jasmine's graduation, framed certificates from night school, and a stack of rejection. Letters carefully filed away. Ruby had spent 3 decades cleaning offices in the financial district, watching through glass doors as decisions were made that affected thousands of lives. Now, finally, she had the qualifications to step inside those rooms herself. The navy dress she'd bought from a thrift store hung perfectly pressed until every wreath disappeared. Ruby studied herself in the mirror, adjusting the pearl earrings that had been her mother's. Her reflection showed a woman who had learned to make herself smaller to survive, but whose eyes still burned with unspoken ambition. She whispered a prayer, grabbed her worn leather briefcase, and stepped into the morning that would test everything she believed about herself. The glass tower of Morrison & Associates rose 40 stories into the Chicago sky, its marble lobby gleaming under crystal chandeliers. Ruby's footsteps echoed against the polished floors as executives in $1,000 suits moved past her like water around a stone. She approached the reception desk, where a young woman with platinum hair and manicured nails barely looked up from her screen. "Deliveries are handled at the service entrance," the receptionist said without lifting her eyes. Ruby's spine straightened. "I'm here for an interview. 10:30 with Ms. Harrison, Ruby Washington." The woman's fingers paused over her keyboard, her gaze finally meeting Ruby's with poorly concealed surprise. "Oh, right, have a seat." Her voice carried the dismissive tone of someone already writing the ending to this story. Ruby settled into a leather chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent, watching the parade of polished professionals who belonged in this world. She had prepared for weeks, memorizing market trends, practicing responses to behavioral questions, and crafting stories that showcased 30 years of leadership experience gained in environments these people would never understand. But preparation couldn't armor her against the familiar sting of being seen as an outsider before she ever opened her mouth. 20 minutes past her scheduled time, a woman emerged from the elevator corridor. Sandra Harrison was everything Ruby expected. Sharp suit, sharper smile, and the kind of confidence that came from never having to prove her right to exist in these spaces. She scanned the lobby until her eyes found Ruby, a flicker of something crossing her face before the professional. Mask slipped back into place. "Mrs. Washington, follow me." The conference room was all glass and steel, designed to intimidate. Sandra sat across from Ruby, spreading papers with theatrical precision. She didn't offer coffee or water, didn't engage in the small talk that would have put a nervous candidate at ease. Instead, she leaned back and studied Ruby like a specimen under glass. "So?" Sandra began, her voice carrying an edge Ruby recognized from decades of being underestimated. "You think you're ready to transition from maintenance supervision to strategic consulting?" Ruby kept her voice steady. "I've spent 3 decades observing how businesses operate from the ground up. I completed my MBA while working full-time, graduated summa cum laude, and I understand organizational dynamics in ways that textbooks can't teach." Sandra's laugh was sharp as wind. "That's admirable, really, but this isn't about heartwarming comeback stories. Our clients expect a certain presentation. They need to feel confident in our team's ability to represent their interests at the highest levels." The words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Ruby felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the same sensation she'd experienced countless times when her intelligence was questioned, her worthiness debated, her humanity reduced to a checkbox on someone else's form. But she had learned long ago that dignity was a choice, not a circumstance. "I see," Ruby said quietly. "And what presentation would that be exactly?" Sandra's smile turned predatory. Look, I'm sure you're perfectly capable of what you do, but this role requires someone who can seamlessly integrate with Fortune 500 executives, someone who understands the nuances of high-stakes negotiations, someone who looks the part. She gestured vaguely at Ruby's appearance. We need polished professionals who can command a room, not someone who reminds our clients of, well, you know. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Ruby's hands remained folded in her lap, but inside something shifted. Not anger. She had learned to transmute anger into something more powerful. This was recognition, the clarity that comes when all pretense falls away and truth stands naked in fluorescent light. But what Sandra Harrison didn't know, what none of them could have known, was that Ruby Washington had been hiding in plain sight for 30 years. What they saw as a cleaning lady with ambition was actually something far more significant. And in 5 minutes, the entire power structure of this gleaming tower would shift in ways none of them could imagine. Ruby stood slowly, gathering her briefcase with the same careful dignity she brought to everything else. "Thank you for your time, Miss Harrison." "Of course," Sandra replied, already reaching for her phone. "We'll be in touch." Ruby walked toward the door, her head high, her steps measured. She had heard these words before, felt this particular knife twist in her chest dozens of times, but today felt different. Today the universe was about to remind everyone in this building that truth has a way of surfacing no matter how deeply it's buried. As Ruby approached the elevator, she heard the familiar ding of arriving cars. The doors opened, and out stepped a figure that made her breath catch in her throat. Tall, distinguished, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, Charles Morrison himself, founder and CEO of Morrison & Associates, stepped into the lobby. His eyes found Ruby immediately, and his entire face transformed with recognition, and something that looked remarkably like joy. "Ruby Washington." His voice carried across the marble expanse like a bell. "My God, I can't believe it's you." Every head in the lobby turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The platinum-haired receptionist's mouth fell open as Charles Morrison, the Charles Morrison, strode across the floor with arms outstretched. Ruby felt the world tilt on its axis as 30 years of careful secrets prepared to spill into the light. The woman they had dismissed as a cleaning lady with delusions of grandeur was about to reveal herself as something far more significant than any of them had imagined. "Hello, Daddy," Ruby said softly, and watched as the foundations of their assumptions crumbled like sandcastles at high tide. The word Daddy echoed through the marble lobby like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples that reached every corner of the gleaming space. Charles Morrison's eyes filled with tears as he wrapped his daughter in an embrace that spoke of 30 years of separation, pride, and unconditional love. Sandra Harrison stood frozen in the conference room, doorway, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, and dawning horror. The receptionist's perfectly manicured hand covered her mouth in shock. Other employees emerged from offices and cubicles, drawn by the unprecedented sight of their CEO, embracing a woman they had all dismissed moments before. 30 years, Charles whispered, his voice thick with emotion. 30 years since you walked out of that house and told me you'd make your own way in the world. And look at you. MBA management experience, everything you said you'd accomplish. Ruby's composure finally cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I had to know I could do it myself, Daddy. I had to know my success wasn't just because of your name." Charles held her at arm's length, studying her face with the wonder of a man seeing his child for the first time in decades. "And you did it. Every single thing you set out to prove, you proved. But sweetheart, why are you here? Are you finally ready to come home?" The question hung in the air, loaded with 3 decades of stubborn pride, unconditional love, and the complex mathematics of forgiveness. Ruby glanced back at Sandra Harrison, who looked like she might faint then at the gathering crowd of employees whose assumptions were crumbling in real time. "I applied for a position," Ruby said quietly. "Strategic consulting. I wanted to earn my place here like anyone else." Charles's expression darkened as understanding dawned. His gaze shifted to Sandra, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a man who had built an empire from nothing. Sandra, in my office, now. Mr. Morrison, I had no idea, Sandra began, her voice cracking. That's exactly the problem, Charles said, his tone ice-cold. You had no idea and you didn't bother to find out. You made assumptions based on appearances. And in doing so, you revealed everything I need to know about your character. Ruby watched the scene unfold with a mixture of vindication and sadness. This wasn't how she had wanted her truth to emerge, not as a rescue, not as a revelation that required her father's intervention. She had spent 30 years trying to prove she didn't need his name to succeed, and now that name was the very thing that commanded respect she should have received on her own merits. Have you ever experienced or know someone who has experienced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Charles turned back to his daughter, his voice gentling. Ruby, I know you wanted to do this on your own terms, but maybe it's time to stop punishing yourself for being my daughter. This company, everything I built, it was always meant to be yours someday. Ruby looked around the lobby at the faces staring back at her with new understanding. Some showed shame, others curiosity. A few revealed the dawning respect that should have been there from the beginning. She thought about Jasmine, about the example she wanted to set, about the difference between earning respect and demanding it. I don't want it handed to me, Daddy, she said finally. But I won't let anyone take it from me either. Charles smiled, the expression transforming his face. Then let's talk, not as CEO to applicant but as father to daughter, about dreams, deferred chances earned, and the future we can build together. As they walked toward the elevator, Ruby felt something shift in the atmosphere of the building. Conversations resumed, but in hushed, respectful tones. The receptionist straightened in her chair, suddenly aware that first impressions could be catastrophically wrong. Sandra Harrison disappeared into Charles's office, her career hanging by a thread she had cut herself. Ruby Washington had walked into this building as a woman carrying 30 years of secrets. She was leaving as someone whose truth had finally found its voice, not through anger or revenge, but through the quiet power of dignity maintained and love finally acknowledged. The elevator doors closed on father and daughter, reunited at last, while 40 stories below Chicago stretched out, like a promise of new beginnings. In the reflection of the polished steel doors, Ruby saw not the woman who had spent decades making herself smaller, but the one who had always been there, brilliant, capable, and finally undeniably seen. 3 months later, Ruby Washington sat in the corner office that had always been destined to be hers, reviewing strategic plans for Morrison & Associates' newest initiative, a diversity and inclusion program that would ensure no one else ever walked into their building and faced the assumptions she had endured. Sandra Harrison had been quietly dismissed, not in anger but in recognition that some mistakes reveal character, in ways that can't be overlooked. The platinum-haired receptionist had been reassigned to a position where her judgment would be less consequential after completing sensitivity training that opened her eyes to perspectives she had never considered. But Ruby's greatest victory wasn't in the corner office, or the 6-figure salary, or even the vindication of watching those who had dismissed her scramble to make amends. It was in the phone call she made every evening to her daughter Jasmine, who was now applying to business schools, with the confidence that comes from watching your mother refuse to accept less than she deserved. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Jasmine had said the night before. "Not because of the job or the office or any of that. I'm proud because you never gave up on yourself, even when everyone else did." Ruby looked out her office window at the Chicago skyline, thinking about the woman who had polished her shoes 4 times that morning 3 months ago. That woman had been carrying 30 years of proving herself, 30 years of being underestimated, 30 years of quiet dignity in the face of systematic dismissal. But she had also been carrying something else, an unshakable belief that worth isn't determined by other people's recognition of it. The intercom buzzed. "Mrs. Washington, your 4 o'clock is here." "Send them in," Ruby said, straightening. The framed photograph on her desk, not of her MBA diploma or her corporate achievements, but of herself and Jasmine at last year's graduation, both of them laughing in the sunshine, both of them free. Change doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it walks quietly through marble lobbies carrying worn briefcases and weathered dreams. Sometimes it speaks softly in conference rooms where its voice isn't expected to matter. Sometimes it waits 30 years for the right moment to reveal that truth. Like light always finds a way to surface. Ruby Washington had learned that dignity isn't something you wear like armor. It's something you carry like breath, essential and unshakable. She had discovered that proving yourself doesn't require diminishing others, and that the most powerful victories are the ones that leave room for everyone to grow. In the end, she hadn't needed rescue. She had needed recognition of her worth, her journey, and her right to exist in spaces that had tried to exclude her. When that recognition finally came, it illuminated not just her path forward, but the paths of everyone who had watched her walk through those doors, with her head held high and her heart intact. Some stories end with explosive confrontations or dramatic reversals of fortune. Ruby's story ended with something more powerful: the quiet triumph of a woman who had never stopped believing in herself even when the world forgot to believe in her. And in that belief she had found not just success, but the strength to ensure others wouldn't have to wait 30 years for their truth to be seen. You are amazing. If you genuinely enjoyed this story, please leave a like and subscribe. It's a great feedback for me. If it made you feel seen, heard, or simply reminded you that change is still possible, share it with someone who needs a little hope today. See you.